The Third Reich promised 1,000 years. It got 12. And when it collapsed, it took every man on this list down with it, one way or another. Rope, poison, a bullet, a prison cell. Today, we count down exactly how every major World War II German commander died. Stay until number 1. You already know who it is. You do not know the full story. Field Marshal Walter Model was known as Hitler's fireman, the man dispatched to rescue every collapsing front on the Eastern and Western theaters. He was aggressive, relentless, and arguably the most effective defensive commander the German army produced in the entire war. By April of 1945, his army group was surrounded in the Ruhr pocket, and he faced arrest on charges of war crimes committed on the Eastern Front. Model dissolved his command, released his men, and disappeared into the woods near Duisburg. On April 21, 1945, he walked alone into a forest between Duisburg and the village of Lintorf and shot himself in the head. He had told his staff beforehand that a German field marshal does not surrender. He meant every word of it. Heinz Guderian essentially invented modern armored warfare. His theories and his panzer divisions tore through Poland, France, and deep into the Soviet Union at a pace the world had never seen. He was brilliant, blunt, and clashed repeatedly with Hitler over strategy, getting himself dismissed from command on more than one occasion. Unlike nearly everyone else on this list, Guderian survived the war entirely. Dry, he was captured by American forces in May of 1945 and held as a prisoner of war, but was released in 1948 without facing trial at Nuremberg. Sarcastic, he spent his final years writing his memoirs, a luxury most of his contemporaries did not live to enjoy. Dry, Heinz Guderian died of heart failure in June of 1973 at the age of 85. Sarcastic, old age, not a tribunal, was his verdict. Erich von Manstein was widely regarded as the most gifted operational mind in the entire German army. He designed the plan that destroyed France in 6 weeks, and on the Eastern Front, he held the line together through sheer tactical brilliance long after it should have broken entirely. Tension. After Germany's collapse, he was captured and tried by a British military tribunal, convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Sarcastic, he served less than 4. Dry, released in 1956 due to deteriorating health, he lived quietly in West Germany, consulted for the new Bundeswehr, and wrote extensively about his wartime experiences. Solemn, Erich von Manstein died of a stroke in June of 1973 at the age of 85. Sarcastic, old age, not a tribunal, was his verdict. Gerd von Rundstedt was the most senior field marshal in the German army, recalled from retirement multiple times because the Wehrmacht simply could not manage without him. He commanded major operations in Poland, France, the Soviet Union, and the defense of Western Europe, and was present for some of the most consequential decisions of the entire conflict. Tension. After Germany's collapse, he was captured by American forces in May of 1945 and held as a prisoner of war for several years. Sarcastic, planned war crimes charges against him were ultimately dropped on the grounds of his severely deteriorating health. Dry, he was released and spent his final years in relative obscurity in West Germany. Solemn, Gerd von Rundstedt died of heart failure in February of 1953 at the age of 77. Sarcastic, old age, not a tribunal, was his verdict. Karl Donitz built and commanded Germany's submarine fleet, the force that came closer than anything else to cutting Britain's Atlantic lifeline and potentially deciding the entire war at sea. Tension. In the final days of April 1945, with Hitler dead in his bunker, Donitz was named Reich President in Hitler's last will and testament, making him the final leader of the Third Reich. Solemn. He presided over Germany's unconditional surrender in May of 1945, the last official act of a regime that had started the most destructive war in human history. Tension. At Nuremberg, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, which he served in full without reduction. Sarcastic, Released in 1956, he lived another 24 years writing memoirs and defending his wartime record until the end. Dry, Karl Donitz died of heart failure in December of 1980 at the age of 89, the last surviving senior leader of the Third Reich. Alfred Jodl was Hitler's chief operational planning officer throughout the entire war, present at nearly every major strategic decision from the invasion of Poland in 1939 to the final collapse in 1945. He was meticulous, loyal, and deeply implicated in the planning of campaigns that violated every accepted standard of the laws of war. On May 7, 1945, Jodl personally signed Germany's unconditional surrender at Reims, France, one of the most significant documents of the 20th century. Days later, he was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, convicted of war crimes and crimes of humanity, and hanged alongside Keitel in October of 1946. A West German court posthumously overturned his conviction in 1953, a reversal that has remained deeply controversial among historians and jurists ever since.
Next, we have Wilhelm Canaris, which was head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, and one of the most quietly extraordinary figures of the entire war. While publicly serving the regime, he was simultaneously one of the most significant figures in the internal resistance against Hitler, using his position to undermine operations and protect individuals targeted for death. His secret diaries were discovered in April of 1945, providing undeniable proof of his resistance activities, and Hitler issued the execution order on April 5th. On April 9, 1945, Canaris was led naked to the gallows at Flossenbürg concentration camp. Just before his execution, he tapped a final message in Morse code through the wall to the prisoner in the adjacent cell, stating that he had acted for the good of Germany and was not a traitor. American troops liberated the camp exactly 2 weeks later. Friedrich Paulus was commander of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, the single most catastrophic military defeat in German history and one of the turning points of the entire Second World War. Hitler promoted him to Field Marshal on January 30th, 1943, the clear implication being that a German field marshal should die rather than surrender. Paulus surrendered the following day. Of the approximately 107,000 German soldiers taken prisoner at Stalingrad, only 6,000 survived Soviet captivity and returned home. Paulus spent a decade as a Soviet prisoner of war, testified against Nazi leadership at the Nuremberg trials, and eventually settled in East Germany after his release in 1953. He developed amyotrophic lateral sclerosis in late 1956 and died in Dresden on February 1, 1957. The field marshal who refused to die for the regime outlived it by 12 years. Erwin Rommel was the most celebrated German commander of World War II, respected by his own troops and by the Allied commanders sent to stop him in equal measure. His Afrika Korps fought with a professionalism that earned him a nickname, the Desert Fox, from friend and enemy alike. After being linked to the July 1944 conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, 2 generals arrived at Rommel's home in Herrlingen on October 14, 1944, and presented him with a choice: face a public trial for treason, which would mean execution and reprisals against his family, or take poison, with a guarantee that his family would be protected and his public reputation preserved. Rommel chose to protect his family. He put on his Afrika Korps jacket, said farewell to his wife and son, got into the car, and took a cyanide capsule. The German public was told he had died from complications of wounds suffered in Normandy. It was false. He was given a state funeral. Hitler sent flowers. Reinhard Heydrich was head of Reich Security, one of the primary architects of the Holocaust, and by 1942, the acting ruler of occupied Bohemia and Moravia. He was considered so dangerous and so capable that many within the regime quietly regarded him as Hitler's most likely successor. On May 27, 1942, 2 Czech resistance operatives trained by British intelligence ambushed his open-top car on a Prague street. The first man's Sten submachine gun jammed. The second threw a grenade. Heydrich was not mortally wounded by the blast itself, but shrapnel from the explosion caused septicemia, a severe bacterial infection of the bloodstream. He died on June 4, 1942 at 4:30 in the morning. The man who helped design the machinery of mass murder was brought down by a jammed weapon, a single grenade, and an infection. In retaliation, the Germans destroyed the entire Czech village of Lidice and executed its population. Joseph Goebbels was Reich Minister of Propaganda, the man who controlled what an entire nation heard, read, and believed for 12 years, and who arguably did more than any other individual to sustain popular support for the regime through its most catastrophic failures. On April 30, 1945, Hitler committed suicide and Goebbels became Chancellor of Germany, the title he held for precisely 1 day. On May 1st, Goebbels and his wife arranged the murder of their 6 children in the bunker, sedating them first before administering cyanide. The children ranged in age from 4 to 12 years old. Goebbels and his wife then took their own lives in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Their bodies were burned, though the cremation was incomplete due to limited fuel, and Soviet troops found the remains shortly after. The man who convinced a nation to follow Hitler to the very end followed him all the way down. Hermann Göring was commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, Hitler's designated successor for much of the war, and one of the most powerful figures in the entire Third Reich. As Germany collapsed, he attempted to negotiate independently with the Allies, a move Hitler considered outright betrayal, and which resulted in his immediate dismissal and arrest by the SS in the final days of April 1945. He surrendered to American forces, was brought to Nuremberg, and convicted on all 4 counts: conspiracy, crimes of peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and sentenced to death by hanging. The night before his scheduled execution in October 1946, he swallowed a cyanide capsule that had been smuggled into his prison cell. He died on his own terms. How the capsule reached him has never been definitively established and remains one of the enduring mysteries of the Nuremberg trials. Heinrich Himmler commanded the SS, controlled the concentration camp system, and was the primary operational architect of the Holocaust, responsible for the murder of millions of people across occupied Europe. In the final days of the war, convinced that Germany was finished, he secretly attempted to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediaries, a move Hitler considered the most profound betrayal of anyone in his inner circle. Himmler disguised himself as a regular soldier with false papers and attempted to escape through Allied lines after Germany's surrender. He was stopped and captured at a British checkpoint in May 1945. During a routine medical examination, before any interrogation could take place, he bit down on a hidden cyanide capsule and was dead within minutes. The man who oversaw the murder of millions spent his final moments in a British army tent, hiding behind a false name. It did not save him. Adolf Hitler launched the most destructive conflict in human history, oversaw the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish people and millions of others, and reduced much of Europe to ash and rubble before the end. By late April 1945, Soviet forces were fighting street by street through the ruins of Berlin and closing in on the government district. Hitler had retreated underground into the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, issuing orders to armies that no longer existed and executing anyone accused of defeatism. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief ceremony inside the bunker. The following day, April 30th, with Soviet troops estimated to be less than 500 meters away, Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were carried into the Chancellery courtyard, doused in petrol, and set alight on Hitler's explicit instructions. The 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 years, 3 months, and 8 days. It ended in a concrete bunker with a single gunshot as the city above it burned to the ground. 12 years. That is all the 1,000-year Reich got, and every commander on this list paid a personal price for every single one of those 12 years. Rope, poison, a bunker, a forest, a prison cell. Subscribe to Combat Loadout. The next video is already waiting for you.